And so today we're really going to dive into the next 3 C's, which are all to do with the outreach around your story. So where clarity and credibility are attributes of the story itself, or the way in which you present it. Communities, channels, and courage are all about the getting out there and finding your potential supporters. So communities is about identifying who it is you want to tell the story to. Channels is about how you're going to get those stories to them. So communities is kind of the strategy. Channels are the tactics. And courage is just what you need to get out there and do this work. You know, courage is what we know is what fuels entrepreneurs to be willing to take personal risks, like stand up in front of people, present ideas, launch crowdfunding campaigns, and yes, risk the public failure that can come with those things, because it's only by doing that that we're able to create incredible success as well, and we're able to build communities around the work we're doing. If people don't know what we're up to, they can't possibly get involved or offer their support. And so when we talk about communities, we're really talking about carefully chosen communities, because there's lots of communities out there. When it comes to building your community, that's going to be a result of having reached out to the right people to tell them about your project and your needs, your plans, and to invite them to become part of it. And if you think back to that formula that we covered in the first session, which is reach, how many people are you going to reach with your story? Propensity, how likely are they to care? Capacity, how much are they to give? In a way, communities is focusing just on that propensity piece. You know, that you could get your story, you could work really hard and get your story to 10,000 people over the course of a month. And literally your success or failure will simply come down to, were they the right 10,000 people? There are easily thousands of people out there who would support every one of your projects. But not everyone's going to care, not everyone's going to resonate, not everyone's going to want to know more, not everyone's going to be prepared to donate. So it's a treasure hunt for you, in a way, to figure out who are your potential supporters. And the way to do that is, of course, to be really focused and to be really kind of deliberative in thinking about the match between the thing you're raising money for and the people you want to raise the money from. The way a lot of people do crowdfunding is kind of a spray and pray approach. They just push it out there through wherever they use whatever channels are available to them. And then they just kind of use the same channels repeatedly for 30 days. You know, they're on Facebook, so they share on Facebook for 30 days. They're on Twitter, they share on Twitter for 30 days. But they're not kind of honing in on what are the right Facebook groups, the right hashtags, and so they probably get it in front of plenty of people, maybe, but not the right people. And so obviously our job as fundraisers is to tell stories that make people care. This is why this matters. You know, if people don't care, they're obviously not going to give you money. But everyone's different. So your job as a fundraiser is to create an emotional response, the emotional response that you're looking for. And so what's the human technique for creating emotional responses? And we covered it last time, and I've already mentioned it today. It's storytelling. It's that we tell you, it's not data, it's not information. You know, those can be aspects of it. They normally can come afterwards. People need to care first. And so it's that taking people on a journey. And we talked 2 weeks ago about some of the structure of the journey that we believe in, that we think you kind of start with the positive, hit them with the difficult negative stuff in the middle, and then end with the positive as well. So vision, challenge, solution. But that's just a structure. Not everyone's going to hear. So what communities is all about is figuring out who you're going to tell that story to and what are you going to lead with. Because when you first reach out to people, you don't have the opportunity to sit them down and have them listen to you for 20 minutes where you explain all the fabulous complexity and nuance of your project. You have a moment of their time, and it's about nailing that moment. Stories. So I just love this quote: stories are a communal currency of humanity. Stories are literally what bind us together. Stories are literally what give rise to communities. You know, communities can be thought of almost as people who share a story about who they are and what they care about. A community is a shared story. And so certainly when it comes to building your community, that's going to be from the people who are willing to share your story, to want to get involved, to embrace your goals. But the challenge, as you well know, is that people are really busy. And as I said, we don't get much permission with people's time anymore. We have to win that permission. We have to win their approval to kind of even tell them what we're doing. And so the art of kind of winning people's approval and winning people's attention so that they even have a chance to learn about what you're doing, to decide if they like it, is really the key here. So one of our principles with crowdfunding, and I think a common mistake that people make, is they think of crowdfunding as a way to convert people to their point of view, to convince them that they should care about the thing that you care about. But no one's in the market for new things to care about. And so one of our principles is that you don't try and convert people to care about a new thing. You convene people who already care. Why that matters is that you're able to pitch people on your solution rather than convincing them that the problem exists. So in commercial terms, I float between the not-for-profit and the startup world. In the startup world, they call this product market fit. And what they often talk about is that you want to solve problems people know they have. If someone doesn't know they have a problem, it's going to be hard to sell them your solution. What's more likely to work for you is to think really strategically around who will get it already. Who's going to resonate with this story? Now we just need to find them. Because they're busy, they don't know about you, but they want to. When we're talking about communities, we bring it down to hooks. A hook is that moment of attention that you have. Or a hook is what you're trying to use with that moment of attention. You might have a moment of someone's time, like literally your tweet goes through their feed. And how long do you spend on a tweet? A second. You have a really, you glance at it, it's 140 characters or 280 characters now, and then you decide, do I want to know more or not? Do I want to click, many tweets have links. Do I want to click on this link? Now, the other end of that link is your full story, is your crowdfunding campaign, where it all comes together and you're able to explain the wonderful detail of what you're doing. But no one gets there if that first moment of attention doesn't convince them to want to find out more. And so we call that the hooks. And it's just like with fishing. You got to have the right hook for the right thing that you're trying to catch. So we have a methodology to help you think about the hooks contained within your project. Because every project has a diversity of hooks. It's never just one hook, one thing to talk about. We think there are 5 core hooks, but you might have multiple in some of these. So there's the issue hook. Essentially, what are you doing? So for some of you, that's helping students with dyslexia, others helping homeless people. That's the issue hook. That's the kind of, and all of us normally have this. This is normally, as NGOs, this is normally the one we're comfortable with. The problem is often people don't think about the other hooks. So you spend your whole time out there just talking to people about helping students with dyslexia or homeless people without thinking about these other connections. So obviously, the geographic hook is the where hook. Where is it taking place? People care more about things that are proximate to them than that are far away. The team hook is there something inspiring that the team itself is showing us or communicating to us that we want to support. What we call the approach hook is the how hook. So for instance, we heard a really powerful how hook before on sport as a tool to improve the health and well-being of homeless communities. That's a how hook. And it's a really good one, because as you said, so many of us benefit from sport and understand sport. So I think it's one that we're going to work on a bit, because there's people who will tune out the moment you start talking to them about homeless people, but will tune in when you start talking to them about sport. And that's the job of these hooks, is to try and get people to tune in rather than tune out. And then there's the community hook, which is kind of when people are part of such a strong community that they express their participation in the community through supporting other campaigns that kind of emerge from that community. So I'll flesh these out for you a bit and give examples. Now the issue hook, honestly, is the easy one. I'm pretty sure you all have your issue hook. We just heard all your issue hooks in a way. And it is normally where we start from. So to give this example, this is a project called Launchpad, organized by a organization called One Girl, and they was distributing sanitary pads to female students in, what does it say? Sierra Leone. I think it says there. So this is a very simple, so that they can stay in school for an extra week each month while menstruating. So that's a very simple intervention, really. It's like a few cents per girl per week, helps them get a quarter more education. Incredible. But even within something as simple as this, there's 2 different issue hooks going on here. So often you'll have multiple hooks at a single kind of a single type, and issues are inevitably interconnected. The world is not so simple. And so, issues around dyslexia also feed into issues around the way we teach kids in schools and so on. Like, things get really bound up together. So even in this particular example, there's, I think, essentially 2 hooks, one based on the beneficiaries and the other based on the outcomes. So there's, I think, a women's rights hook that says girls deserve the same opportunities as boys. Full stop, end of story. But there's also another way of talking about this exact same project, which is about development outcomes. So the equal opportunity is not an end in itself. It's a means to the end, which is creating development outcomes in developing nations. And actually, this is one of the most high impact, low cost impacts you can create in terms of big term development outcomes, because all the research says that one of the best ways to increase overall economic vitality and development in a community is to increase women's education. And this is the cheapest, most effective way in which we could add 25% to women's education, essentially. So this is a different hook. It's this exact same simple project, but quite a different hook. This is no longer about women per se. It's about the fact that that happens to be the best way to create development outcomes. Now, inherently, we care about places we are. Wherever I am, wherever my house sits is a place I care enormously about. So, someone might not care about homelessness in the general course of events, but if someone starts sleeping on their front lawn, they're going to suddenly care about homelessness a whole lot, because it's literally come home to them. But people don't just care about places they are now, of course. They care about places they're from or places where they've had significant experiences. So geography, place, is a really powerful focus of emotion. This particular example is Gully Gully. That was the open source mapping project in Kathmandu I touched on very briefly at the very start of the last workshop. My mother-in-law supported this campaign because she found herself in Nepal after the breakup of her marriage. She spent 6 months in Nepal after that, and it's the most special place in the world to her. She literally couldn't understand what these guys were doing. Could not wrap her head around the whole open source mapping thing and why that was useful or good. And in the end, she just decided, well, if these nice seeming Nepalese people are telling me that it's good and important and that is going to be a good thing for Nepal, great. I'm on board. That's what I care about. Also, I'll get some prayer flags back. I could really use some new prayer flags. So for her, it was all about the geographic hook. She's literally supported more or less every Nepalese project on our site. The team hook is where, separate to the actual project that's been implemented, you look at the people implementing the project and say, that's awesome, I want to support them. Now, this is separate from the friendship connection we talked about last time. It's not about supporting your friends, it's about what that team represents. So this particular team were two 16-year-olds in Oakland who called themselves the Oakland Dons, and they raised some money. They came to us through a program called Youth Venture, and they raised money to start a community garden in Oakland. So you can see there the stories we've covered so far. The issue story, the what story, was community gardening, access to fresh fruit and nutrition. That's connected to a place story around West Oakland, which is America's biggest food desert. A food desert is where you literally can't buy fresh fruit or produce. The only food you can buy in West Oakland is literally fried chicken, pizza, and whatever you can buy from the 7-Eleven. So that's a really important context, an important story for them. Neither of those stories is why I personally chipped into these guys. I chipped in because I'm really passionate about youth entrepreneurship. So it wasn't about what they were doing, it was about who they were. For me, and I love seeing 16-year-olds step up to make a difference. The not-for-profit Vibewire that I ran for 8 years, basically my 20s, was all about getting 16, teenagers through university students to step forwards with ideas to make a difference. So I get really inspired when I see 16-year-olds, particularly from difficult circumstances, stepping up to change their community for the better. The fourth hook is the how hook, the approach. We sometimes call it the innovation hook, but actually it's not just for things that are actually innovative. It's just how are you making a difference in a very simple term. So this is sport, for instance. Sport is how you are planning to make a difference. Sport and nutrition might be two kind of connected but slightly different hooks around how you're making a difference for the homeless population. This is an example. This is a great project founded by a social enterprise called Balba Speech, and they built an app called Speech for Good. Balba Speech was founded by a guy called Jack, who himself suffered from a severe stutter, and he was fortunate to be from a fairly well-off family who could afford to send him for the intensive speech therapy required to overcome that stutter. Something like 5 years of weekly sessions. You can imagine how much that costs, and a lot of people in America can't afford that. It's not covered by most insurances, etc. And so he really wanted to make that experience or that opportunity, that help, more available to more people using mobile technology by creating an app that could provide a high-quality speech therapy-like experience for people. And so there's lots of juicy stuff at the how. How is, I think, one of the best ways. I mean, all of them, I guess. But the job of all the hooks that are not your issue hook is to bring people across to your campaign who wouldn't engage directly with the issue. Because that's most people, for whatever it is you're doing. And it's by selling them on the exciting aspects of how you're doing that. And then finally, there's what we call the community hook or the we hook. The we hook is when you are part of that yourself. You know, like this is part of my community, my culture, and in a way, supporting that campaign is expressing your participation in that community. So you see this sometimes with religious groups, diasporas. There's a social enterprise accelerator in Melbourne for Jewish founders of social enterprises. That's a great example of kind of those multiple hooks coming together. They obviously like social enterprise, but they want to support members of their community to launch social enterprise. You know, other members of the Jewish community in Melbourne. That's who they want to support. So that's applying that community hook. This is kind of a classic example of it. This is a leadership training program called the Centre for Sustainability Leadership, raising money to provide a scholarship to help an awesome emerging leader who wouldn't otherwise be able to afford it. So the issue hook, in a way, their issue hook underneath their whole program is we need to create a generation of, we need to create sustainability leaders, as they call it, people with sustainability as a lens on everything else they do through their leadership. I totally agree with that. I'm on board with that issue hook. It's a tough leap, though, to take me from agreeing with the general premise that it would be good to have a higher level of leadership that focused more on sustainability to saying, let's raise $10,000 to send one person through the Centre for Sustainability Leadership. The solution is out of scale with the issue that's been described. If the issue is this like overall lack of leadership or endemic problems within which kind of leadership takes place in our society, sending one person through a scholarship program just doesn't feel like it's doing anything. So if you actually get me thinking about the scale of the challenge, in some ways, it doesn't then lead through. I'm not, like, if you were embedding it in the school system, sure, that sounds like a proper systems level approach. This doesn't. So instead, this becomes a more personal story. Do you want to kind of change the directory of one person's life by giving them these skills? Sounds cool, but how do I know this course is any good? If we're talking about the impact it has on an individual, how do I judge that? Unless I've done the course myself. And if I've done the course myself, I have a really good read on what it can mean for an individual. It changed my life. It made me a better leader. I feel more effective in the world. I would love to give other people the opportunity that I had, the experience I had. And I know that there's a lot of people out there who can't afford this course. So I'm inspired to try and bring one of those people into our community to give them that opportunity. And so one of the characteristics of the kind of we hook is total clarity around who's in and out. Total focus on a single community, not on all these different hooks necessarily, but on a particular community who you want to really focus on, who you think is going to resonate with that story. And so this is our model for how crowdfunding really happens. That you start in the middle, and you work your way out. And of course, a classic mistake that a lot of people make is they just try and think about crowds right from the word go. As we talked about 2 weeks ago. It's not really about crowds, it's about communities. So how do you build communities? Well, you have to start with real relationships. So peers, by peers we mean anyone who you really know in the real world. Every person whose name you know is what we would define as a peer, every person who knows your name. Tribes are all the people responding to those different stories that you're putting out there. So in some ways, you can think of tribes are kind of many of our Twitter followings. On Twitter, you don't connect with people you know, you connect with people you want to listen to. So in a way, Twitter it tends to be what we would call those tribes because they're connected by shared interests. And then crowds is on the outside because people expect to see something labeled crowds, I guess, when we're talking about crowdfunding. Crowds mostly doesn't happen. To the extent that crowds happens at all, it's when a campaign breaks out into total mainstream prominence, which happens very rarely. It tends to happen when something has just kind of broken some sort of record for the amount raised. And so there's kind of two key mistakes people make. One is thinking it's all about crowds, which we covered pretty well at the first workshop. The second, though, is jumping directly to tribes. So even people who understand everything I'm saying, I get it, it's focused, it's got to be targeted, it's got to be mindful, and they just start doing all of that without first inviting their core community in. Some organizations do that quite deliberately. They're like, we don't want to use our crowdfunding campaign to just raise money from our existing community of donors. We want to use it to acquire new donors. That makes perfect sense. But because crowdfunding is peer-to-peer, It's really important that you have a group of peers that you start with. Otherwise, you're inviting the world to a party that no one's at. And I click on the link and I come to your page and you've got 0 supporters. There's almost 0 chance I'm going to support you. No matter how perfect the story lines up, no matter how compelling the idea is, it's all just going to feel a bit off to me. There's something fundamentally uncredible about an organization that hasn't managed to attract any supporters in advance of me. And I've never heard of them before. And so it's really important that you get that first group of supporters, and they'll almost always come from your existing relationships. Either your existing individual relationships as people, or your existing organization relationships, your 3,000 volunteers. Amazing starting point. So thinking about who are your peers so that they can share with their peers, so they can share with their peers and so on.